it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Out of Bounds podcast. Josh Durso, Nate Sharman here, keeping you in bounds with the latest from around the golf world after an absolutely electric 2 weeks on the PGA Tour. Bay Hill Players Championship. Incredible stuff. Nate, we were locked in. How much fun was it watching golf the last 2 weekends?
Yeah, Josh, that was probably one of the more fun outcomes we've had on the PGA Tour. Maybe excluding some majors, maybe including majors. Depends on what you're looking at. That on Sunday at the Arnold Palmer, and then at TPC Sawgrass the following week, you had just an amazing round by Xander Schauffele and Wyndham Clark to find themselves in the lead. Then you had Scottie Scheffler, who's battling a neck injury throughout the first few days of the tournament. You think he could possibly withdraw? He's getting, treatment throughout throughout his round on Thursday and Friday, and he gets to a point where he shoots just a magnificent round on Sunday, comes from behind and wins the golf tournament, right? And then you had storylines the whole day going on too, Wyndham Clark and Xander battling it out. And then Wyndham Clark has a, 15, 20 footer to force a playoff at Scottie Scheffler on 18. It hits 80% of the cup, bounces back at him. Just the most amazing finish you could possibly have, Josh. What a cool day. Scottie Scheffler gets it done again, wins on back-to-back weeks on the PGA Tour, and defends his Players' Championship title from last year.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think Bay Hill for me was a little less exciting just because, he was in control. But the Players was different because this was something that we've now seen a little bit out of Scottie over the last 2 years. It's still very early in his career, but his ability to come from behind is not something that should be understated at all. And if you're any of these other guys who get into a lead with Scottie Scheffler lurking in the top 10, I don't care what your lead is, you should be looking behind you. And I think we're getting to a point where that very well may be happening.
What was so big about Bay Hill, Josh, was just we were looking at the PGA Tour landscape, in the year 2024, and we were saying, look at all these long shots won. Matthew Pavon won. We had an amateur win for the first time on the PGA Tour. We had some really cool stories, but we didn't have like a big household name win. And then you had Scottie Scheffler just dominate the field and win on Sunday. So that was the cool part of that. And then everyone goes, well, it's really hard to repeat. And he goes out and does it. So then he repeats and wins again. Josh, we've talked so much about Scottie Scheffler and the way how his putting has struggled. Some of his strokes gained numbers these last year or so have rivaled prime Tiger Woods a little bit. They've gotten close into those numbers, Josh. What are you looking at when he's putting? Are you seeing a big difference between now and kind of where he was at last year with the flat stick?
I mean, it looks just in the last couple of weeks, it looks completely different. It looks like mentally he's freed up finally. And I think that was the big thing that was missing before is, so much of putting is just mental. And sometimes just changing the putter. We've seen him do that a few times now in the last year to year and a half, as these putting struggles have been a big deal for him. But, what we've seen the last 2 weeks, not just making birdie putts when he puts himself in position because of the strokes gain number. We know he's in position often. Like he is in position more than most on tour when it comes to like birdie looks. But he also made, especially this past weekend, made some incredibly important par putts. And I think that is the sign of a guy who's really figured out and gotten comfortable with the flat stick. So whatever it is, it worked. I know, he switched to that mallet type putter I believe it's a Spider model. So, there's that. How long it lasts, I don't know. He's been every other part of his game, every other phase of his game has been locked in now for so long, or what feels like so long. Part of me almost expects his putting to remain locked in too, which is another reason to be very concerned if you're the rest of the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I think it was, Wyndham Clark kind of talked about how he kind of features his game off of Scotty Scheffler, which is pretty cool to talk about. He kind of looks for Scheffler and kind of gauges his own game off of him and kind of where he's at. And then he's chasing him down on Sunday after being in front of him, too, right? So pretty cool stuff from Wyndham there, too, to almost get that done. Josh, what is Scotty in your mind? What do you think he needs to do in terms of, rattling off even more wins this season to be even talked about in terms of what this dominance is like compared to a young Tiger Woods when he was dominating the PGA Tour?
I don't know. To me, I'm not sure what the timeline is, because I think no matter what, just like early in Tiger's career, and throughout, frankly, we saw a lot of, he'll never be Jack Nicklaus, right? We even still hear that, right? So it's hard to compare different eras, but I'm just going to say, based on what we've seen for the last roughly 2 years, into this whole Scotty Scheffler experience, he is like a cross between Tiger and Dustin Johnson. And, he's won 7 stroke play events. He's got the match play win. 3 of those stroke play tournament wins are come from behinds on Sunday. He's beat a list of really good golfers. Pretty much every great golfer we've talked about here on this podcast or anywhere in golf in that time. Brooks Koepka, Xander Schauffele, Cam Smith, Patrick Cantlay, Taylor Gooch, Victor Hovland, Jon Rahm, Min Woo Lee, Shane Lowry, Brian Harman, and Wyndham Clark. These are guys who have won multiple majors. These are guys who are frequently talked about as among the 5 best golfers on planet Earth, and he has either held them off or come from behind and beat them in the last 2 years. To me, especially when we're talking about Brooks, when we're talking about Victor, when we're talking about Jon Rahm, we're talking about guys who are truly in their prime, right?
Right.
We're not talking about, these guys are the contemporaries that he will be compared to for the remainder of his career. That's just very impressive. To me, that almost exceeds the Tiger Woods stuff, because if there's any criticism of the early part of Tiger's career, it's that he didn't really have the list of rivals that on a skill set basis could do the things that he could do with a golf ball. Jon Rahm, Cam Smith, Victor Hovland, even Wyndham Clark right now in this moment, they can do what Scotty does with the golf ball. They just can't do it as consistently. And that's where the Dustin Johnson comparison comes in, because I think if you kind of game this out over a long period of time, if Scotty is able to somehow keep this going for, a span of a couple years, or he's able to even remain 75% as consistent as he has been in the last 2 years over the next decade, isn't that how Dustin Johnson became what he became, right? By showing up and being that consistent top 5 presence in professional golf. I think he can do that. But again, I think we're always going to see that he's not Tiger Woods or he's not, because it's so difficult to compare between eras like that. But what do you think? Where does Scheffler's dominance sit for you, and what does he have to do in order to start to maybe validate some of those comparisons to a Tiger Woods?
What's most crazy to me about Scotty Scheffler is that I think he turns 28 in a few months. And we talk about golfers, right? And we talk about you getting into your prime in maybe your late 20s, even your early 30s, you're playing your best golf, right? On the PGA. And Scotty is just entering, I don't know what you can, I'm 28, 27 years old, and I talk about my late 20s isn't here yet. So I don't know where that could go with Scotty. He could, there's a world where he could get better. That the putter could stay hot. He could unlock something, and he could rip off a bunch more events, and we could talk about him in the same world as Tiger. I would like to see him do that. I think that would be really good for the PGA Tour. I think they've really found a way to get Scotty as the poster boy, right? When you think PGA Tour, when you think golf, you think about Scotty Scheffler. He's a very likable guy, very happy, smiley kind of a guy. I think he's really, really good for players to kind of, young players in the game to kind of align with too. And plus he has that such noticeable swing, right, Josh? I know everyone was wanting to do the Scheffler shuffle, right? That's something that, is talked about a lot on social media and stuff too. So I think Scotty is doing a really good job of kind of being this headliner for the tour. And I think, Josh, to answer your question a little better, I think if he just keeps doing what he's doing and finds a way to be around in more tournaments, I don't see why he won't be talked about in prime and rivaled against Prime Tiger throughout the next 10 years of his career. Because he still has so much of his prime left.
I can't recall the exact stat, but I believe I saw this past weekend that he is finished in the top 10 in 75% of his starts. Which I'm trying to remember. I don't think he's really missed a cut too. I think he has it's around 27 rounds under par over the last events, which is an incredible feat too. He doesn't even take a round off. It seems like even a lot of those rounds when the putter hasn't been hot and he hasn't made a lot of putts, he just ball strikes his way around the golf course. So he's going to make a few 10-footers and get himself under par. It's pretty wild stuff. Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the players and who suffered the biggest setback of the chasers. Obviously, Xander and Wyndham, they weren't chasers in the beginning, but they were chasers on the 72nd hole. Who suffered the bigger setback, do you think, of the two of them? Because that's definitely what the debate has been over the last 4 days since the tournament ended.
For me, it's Xander Schauffele. It's Wyndham Clark has won this year. He won twice last year. He's been kind of around, so and he had a chance to force that to a playoff. Just the golf gods per se just didn't let him have it. But Xander, he's just been in positions to win a lot of high profile events over the last few years, and he just hasn't been able to get it done, unfortunately. And this is the 16th time since 2018 he's been in the final group. So he's always around in a lot of high profile events too. He's played decently in majors, obviously hasn't come our way with a victory. We would like to see him come around with one of these high profile victories. Taking a look at that Saturday round, I believe he shot 65. He played really, really fantastic to put himself in the 54-hole lead. You were rooting for him in the back of your mind to get that done and get that sort of cliche form of monkey off his back, right? And be able to kind of start inserting himself into more of these winner circles. But it's just kind of sad to see that, Xander Schauffele is, left with his hands crossed and trying to figure out what he did wrong and where he can improve. Hopefully he gets one done soon.
Yeah, I do wonder if there's an element of when he does finally get that win, if he's going to be kind of unlocked, if we see him ascend to the next level.
I think definitely it'll help his confidence, and that we know how much of a momentum game golf is. Yeah.
For me, it's like, I agree with you. It's definitely Xander. The only way I think that it becomes Wyndham is if he lets it. If he lets that lip out, which I don't think he would, if he lets that lip out on the 72nd hole, affect him in some way beyond the tournament. He doesn't really seem like the kind of golfer who would do that, but golf's a funny game when it comes to the 6 inches between our ears. So you never know. But yeah, to your point, he's accomplished a hell of a lot in the last year. Frankly, I think even with Wyndham's finishing runner-up to Scotty Scheffler, this version of Scotty Scheffler, there's no shame in that. So especially when you have a major victory in the last year and you have a couple other wins too, elevated event wins, no less. So, to me, that it's all good. It's just a matter of, for Xander, I think he needs to get this off his back soon. You and I were talking before we came on here that we were wondering who needs it more, Xander or Patrick Cantlay. You made the argument that it's probably Patrick. Do you think Patrick needs it more than Xander?
Yeah, I think so. I think, with Patrick Cantlay just taking more of initiative between the PGA Tour, he's just kind of in the limelight a little more. He's, a couple more years into his career too than Xander. They are close friends, but I think Patrick is just looking for that. Xander, I mentioned that stat of, 18 times he's been in the final group. It seems like Xander's there a little bit more, but both of them don't have the big, huge signature win. They do have the playoff wins, but they don't have the big signature elevated, whether it be an elevated event or a major championship.
Yeah, you know what? I hadn't really given it a lot of thought until you mentioned it there, but I almost feel like Patrick Cantlay's role on the tour to me, almost gives him a little bit of a pass. We saw the toll with everything. We're going to talk about this whole PIF PGA Tour thing here a little later in the show, but we've seen what it can do to the guys who are taking the lead. Rory is the poster boy for that, right? And Patrick Cantlay has definitely taken a very front seat approach to this, and to be at the top of your game while also quote unquote fighting that fight. It is a position not to be envied. So I think it's actually going to be more difficult for him looking ahead the rest of the year to get that big signature win.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's got to find it, and it's going to be really hard for a guy like Patrick Cantlay. But I don't doubt him because he's played some really good golf in some really big spots. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, and I think he does need to do that for his career.
Yeah, I do think that there's probably an element of, his legacy, if he is able to be one of the brokers of a deal between the PIF and the PGA Tour, I think his legacy will be sealed, so to speak. I think he will be remembered fondly by the PGA Tour, historically speaking and otherwise, no matter what happens, whether he's winning majors or not winning majors. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Another reason why I think it's Patrick Cantlay out of those two is just because of the heat he takes in terms of being slow and being smug in interviews and stuff like that. Xander comes off a little bit differently from his personality. He's done some really fun stuff with Daniel Rappaport over at Barstool Golf. But Patrick Cantlay is just kind of that smug, sort of kind of has that attitude where people just don't like it. And plus, people call him slow and people don't like the way he plays in that respect too. So I think that definitely plays a role.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a interesting situation. He's definitely one of the most unique players on tour. There's no doubt about that.
That's for sure.
Let's talk finish. Was this past weekend the most exciting finish the PGA Tour has had since this entire Live PGA Tour stuff started?
I think for non-majors, definitely. I think that's not only because of how good of the golf was played, and we talked about that, but Josh, the broadcast was awesome. I mean, yep. They brought in Kevin Kisner to sit with Smiley on Friday and do their happy hour, where they brought in guys like Keith Mitchell to kind of come in and talk on that 17th tee box and talk about what's going on through players' heads as they get through that hole, which is just a magnificent hole, by the way. We talk about the stadium course so much at Scottsdale, and that kind of mirrors it. You have people all around it, people yelling and people, having a beer too, and just enjoying it too. So how important that is to players. I mean, this is like a 125-yard wedge shot, and sometimes these players are hitting gap wedge, a very simple golf shot that players aren't doing to the highest level. So that just shows you how important this hole is to them. So that was really cool. And then on Sunday, Kisner stepped into the booth a little more, and he did a really good job. They were able to kind of toss it to him at certain points of the broadcast and really align with that. What did you have here, Kiz? What did you go with here? And having Kisner, been there at the Players Championship that one year where he was really, really in the top few and then eventually lost. Well, first of all, Josh, they didn't let him forget about that. They mentioned it a few times to him, which was kind of cold-blooded in my aspect. But I just think it was cool. And Kisner's already a natural too, because there was a couple times on 17 where guys were getting ready to hit big shots, and he would let that broadcast breathe for 5 or 6 or 7 seconds, let the smack of the golf ball be hit by the club, and then say something as the ball gets in the air. So he has that natural broadcast ability in my mind too. So I really think that added to the element of how cool Sunday was for the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think this was the best broadcast that NBC has had in the last couple of years. I even think that there's an argument to be made now that this was the most exciting finish we've had, even compared to the majors last year. Things didn't seem to be coming down to the wire quite as much as this one did. And also, something I found really interesting is reading some of the accounts from on the ground at TPC Sawgrass. There are a lot of comparisons to Augusta between what obviously TPC has put into the actual course, the grounds, etc. In addition to the mystique that comes with that course, because I think in terms of, top 3 most memorable golf courses on the tour circuit, I think this is probably number 2 to Augusta. Yeah. So, I think for all of those reasons, with the finish that we had, this was basically a banner weekend for the tour. The ratings drop that we saw, I still can't wrap my head around. I think it points to some of the bigger challenges that golf has right now as a viewed product on television. Yes, you and I thought the broadcast was great, but I always try to put myself in the shoes of a non-golf fan or sort of a quote unquote casual golf fan. And I don't know if the presentation necessarily works for those people. And I think at the end of the day, that's part and parcel to this whole consistent ratings drop that we're seeing at basically every event. If you compare numbers from 4 or 5 years ago to present day, every weekend, we're seeing 500,000, 1 million, 1.5 million less people watching. And that is a problem given that golf has consistently been on the rise in popularity, in playing, in social media, in the whole 9 yards. So they've still got some work to do, but this past weekend, I think, was, when it all comes down to it, maybe the best finish we've seen in the last year and a half.
Yeah, I think it definitely was leaps and bounds better, the broadcast. And we've mentioned we've mentioned on this podcast about how they've improved, right? Bringing in Kisner too, just having a guy that's a lot more relatable to the average fan. I mean, he's got this accent. He's got the Southern boy accent, which is just kind of fun to listen to, especially, most golf fans don't have that accent, right? And then you're hearing that. You're hearing kind of the more relatable stuff where he's talking about, the lie versus the grain and talking about that part of things, where if you're hearing this older gentleman talk to you about it, you're kind of just tuning it out. You're like, this doesn't really matter. But Kevin Kisner's telling you, been there before, and you're just you're more apt to listen to it, I think, if you're a casual golf fan. And I think that plays a big part in this, Josh. And yeah, TPC Sawgrass is just incredible. I mean, there's a reason they call it the 5th major, and there's this many people, kind of align with it, Josh. And I just think the PGA Tour has done a really nice job in kind of jumping into that narrative too, with the island green and everything like that, and jumping into that head first and being able to showcase that golf course.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we saw it at Phoenix. That same kind of deal with 16 there, kind of putting the broadcast out there as opposed to in a tower above the action. That's always good. It's always good.
It's a great name for it too, between Kiz and Smiley. I think they do a great job with that.
Yeah, they do. Because they're relatable. They're both players that have played in the last, 5-6 years. That makes all the difference in the world. Let's talk about Wyndham Clark's comments at Bay Hill. He took some heat for saying the PGA Tour product would be better if only the top 100 players had tour cards and everyone else was in some sort of relegation system. I know you probably don't have a ton of thoughts on that, but I would just like to say, I don't think the comments themselves, there's transcripts of it on social media, on Twitter or X, or any of the other social medias too. I don't think it's that huge a deal, but I understand why people were a bit put off by it. There's no doubt at this point that yes, Wyndham Clark is one of the best players in the world right now, but go back 14 months and a lot of people didn't even know who he was, right? And he wasn't a guy who even had guaranteed status in elevated events. And, there were plenty of people who, watched golf and thought that he was going to be one of those career middle of the road guys and that he had really missed his opportunity to be one of the best in the world. So hearing a late bloomer say that, less than a year after he got in or got into the fold, so to speak, into the top 10 discussion, top 5 discussion, I think really put enough people off that the comments felt a bit tone deaf. When Rory McIlroy says it, a lot different than when Wyndham Clark says it. And he was largely agreeing with what Rory McIlroy had said. So which is, that goes back to the point where that's why I don't think it's that big a deal. But at the same time, I understand why people were like, what the hell? Like that's a weird, a weird thing to say for a guy who literally a year and 2 months ago didn't even really have guaranteed status like anywhere here on tour. So
right, but I don't hate the concept of relegation that he's talking about, though. I think it could work in some capacity, but like you said, Josh, it is a little bit tone deaf. We've heard Rory and Jon Rahm and some others talk about how the LIV and PGA should kind of work as kind of how European soccer does in terms of two different leagues being able to coexist, right? And then you have relegation within those leagues. So I think it could work. But yeah, it definitely is tone deaf, like you said, to kind of hear it from Wyndham Clark versus hearing it from Rory McIlroy. You're like, okay, that makes sense. He's been around forever. He can make decisions on this.
It's one of those scenarios where it could be the right message and the right plan, but the wrong messenger.
Yeah, for sure.
Let Rory carry that torch. You don't need to, Wyndham. Let's talk about Jon Rahm's Masters dinner. We saw that the dinner menu dropped. The dinner menu dropped, and people have opinions about that because social media, I guess. I don't have very many thoughts on his tapas centric dinner menu for the Champions Dinner at Augusta, but a lot of people do. I'm more curious about what that conversation is going to be like among all of the people in that room. We've heard stories over the last few years that those since LIV became a thing, that those have gotten a little squirrely at times. But I think there's more LIV guys in the room now. So, right. Maybe that'll be different. What do you think? What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, the tapas dinner's cool. He's paying homage to Spain and stuff and bringing in a Spain chef. That's all cool and fine and well. But what I think is the most important part out of all of this that kind of came out yesterday while this dinner came out was Jon Rahm kind of making comments about how he's missed being able to defend his titles on the PGA Tour. And he's going to be able to defend his title on the Masters. Obviously he's going to be able to be there and won last year. But yeah, Josh, what you said about that, the conversation, kind of happening in Butler Cabin for the Masters dinner is interesting, right? Because part of me thinks they're not going to talk about the LIV versus PGA thing very much. They're going to kind of leave it all to Masters talk. But part of me doesn't think that too. So I'm kind of interested to see, kind of what comes out of this. I think if anything big does happen in terms of conversations like that, they'll keep it pretty tight-lipped. And I think, the Masters does a pretty good job of kind of controlling the narrative in terms of what goes out to the media. So I think that's, can get kind of excited for that, Josh, but you do need to remember that they will keep it pretty private. But it's going to be interesting to see as Jon Rahm, gets in front of a mic at the Masters and talks about, kind of this move that's happened since December and kind of where he's at mentally a little bit. I don't know how much he's going to talk about it, but it has been interesting to see these Jon Rahm quotes come out over the last few months or weeks or whatever you want to call it about how he might miss aspects of the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I don't buy it. You took the money, you jumped, you went. I think some of that is
cake and eating it too a little bit. So that's tough.
Yeah, I think some of it is just him saying the right things to maybe try and convert some of the people who might, begrudge him a bit for going to LIV. I have no problem with him going to LIV and taking the money and doing what he is best for him and his family. Right. But the back and forth that we see afterward, and it just kind of it hits me weird. And I'm not really crazy about it. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me, right? Let the guy live, let the guy do his thing. Don't ask him questions about missing the PGA Tour. Don't act who cares? Obviously it wasn't that important to him. Otherwise he wouldn't have taken the money and gone. He'd still be on the PGA Tour. I see what you did there
about saying letting that guy live, by the way. That's good.
Okay, so let's get into some of these other golf topics that we have to break through from the last 2 or 3 weeks. First things first, are we getting to a point where wins are more equal on the PGA Tour and LIV Golf?
I'm still not there yet. I think there's somewhere in between. I guess it depends on what event you're talking about on the PGA Tour. You have I have them somewhere valued between the elevated events and the non-elevated events. Obviously they're better and the fields are better than the non-elevated events, but how can you compare LIV Hong Kong to what we just saw on this past weekend at TPC Sawgrass? I don't think you can really compare those two. So I would kind of find it somewhere in the middle. Where are you kind of thinking, Josh?
So I think, to me, obviously the majors are in a league of their own, not even close to that. Right. And then as far as PGA Tour stops, I was going through the list trying to figure out which ones are clearly more important / powerful / historic than any of these new live events. The Players, the Arnold Palmer at Bay Hill, the Memorial Jacks tournament. I can't really put the Genesis there, even though that's Tiger's tournament. Other than that, I feel like it's pretty much equal. It's certainly, I would say winning a live event is a bigger accomplishment than winning a non-elevated event on the PGA Tour. I don't know how you can make the argument that it isn't. I don't know how anyone could, because of the sheer volume of really great golfers that are now playing and live.
One last round plays a big factor, I think. But yeah, I guess I can agree with you.
Does it matter though if you only have 3 players in the top 20 even participating in the event?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's just that is just a different. To me, that is a different thing. It's just a different thing entirely. Nothing against it, but I think it's something that the PGA Tour would probably want to keep in mind as it moves forward with a potential deal with the PIF. But do I think a live event is ever going to reach the status or the level of, a major or the Players or the Bay Hill or the Memorial? No shot. No shot. Just
to me, the difference, Josh, is the courses, right? There's so much, we're talking about the Players. There's so much that is involved with TPC Sawgrass. There's so much that's history with Scottsdale as well. There's history with a lot of different tour stops too. And just kind of being able to be a fan and turn on your TV and you see the 17th hole at TPC Sawgrass. And if you're any form of golf fan, you know what that is. Yep. And I think that's what the big difference between LIV and the PGA Tour is. LIV seems to play different courses every year almost. They have some that they keep the same, but a lot of them are different. I think that they're having an identity kind of, I don't know if crisis is the right word, but there's just such a young league. It's hard to kind of make that impact on golf courses so early on. That's why the PGA Tour is always going to have a leg up in those big events in my mind.
Yeah, no, I totally see the point, and I don't disagree. I think that could potentially shift though over time. Before we get to the status of PIF PGA Tour negotiations, let's jump on this topic, which we've seen a lot of chatter about over the last few weeks. Is Joaquin Niemann one of the best players in the world right now?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Joaquin's been really, really successful on the LIV Tour. 2 wins and a top 4th a couple weeks ago. If you're taking a look at rankings, right? Data Golf has a really cool ranking. To look into OWGR is just obviously tough. You don't really, the LIV Tour guys aren't on there, so you can't even really look at it that much. But Data Golf has him at 12, so I think that's probably about right. I might have him a little bit higher, but I think that's pretty good in terms of a strokes gain model approach from it. I think that's probably a pretty good one. I'm really interested, Josh, to see how he plays at the Masters. If he plays really well at that, it's really going to validate what we've been talking about with Joaquin Niemann over the last few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if he's able to if he's even able to contend. It doesn't have to be a win, right?
10. Right. Oh, of course. If his name pops up on the leaderboard on Sunday on the first page, I think is a massive win for him.
Yeah. I kind of feel like I put him somewhere in the number 5 to 6, 7 range. There are guys that come to mind that I just think he's playing better than and has played better than for probably the last year or year and a half. JT, Spieth, Homa, few that come to mind. Is he as good as a Victor Hovland? I don't think so. No. Is he John Rahm? I don't think so. He's not Scotty Scheffler. He's not Rory McIlroy. So, that's kind of to me where it sits for me. But, I don't think there's any system, whether we're talking about Data Golf or whether we're talking about the OWGR, that would ever give him that level of respect at putting him in the 5 to 7 range. Like you said, he's around 12 on Data Golf, which is respectable and very, very solid. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure Patrick Cantlay is in the single digits on Data Golf. I haven't looked in the last couple of days, but
I believe.
One of those two guys has found a way to win, not once, but twice. The other hasn't even really contended that much. So, again, we saw the meltdown that Cantlay had a few weeks ago. that's another nail in that coffin for me when it comes to this comparison. But absolutely, I think Niemann deserves the respect of being considered one of the 5 to 10 best golfers on the planet right now.
Well, he knew when he was leaving PGA Tour that he was going to have less eyes on him, right? And knew that he was going to gain less respect for playing really good golf. So he's got to play well in about a month in Augusta. And if he does that, I think he gains a lot of non-live centric watchers, gets a lot of respect in their minds. If he plays well.
Yeah, and also I know this
is a cut. I think people have a lot of ammo to say, well, he's playing on a live tour. Who cares?
Yeah. I think another name that's going to come up a lot in this kind of conversation is Taylor Gooch, right?
Another one.
I was one of the ones who said a few weeks ago that I thought he probably deserved an invite to the Masters, and I think that's probably more his not getting an invite is probably more political than it is anything else, because he did have a very respectable year last year on live, a very good year,
won the tournament.
Yeah,
season long.
Yeah, I just think now Liv is getting viewed a lot differently now because Jon Rahm is there. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's completely fair to all the guys who have been playing for the last year and a half over there and been playing really well. So again, he's another guy, I don't know where he sits in that ranking on Data Golf, but Taylor Gooch is another guy that I would say, he's not at Niemann's level, but I would say that he's certainly a top 20 golfer in the world, probably based on what we've seen. Yeah. So to me, that's where this whole, all of, professional golf in general needs to figure out a way to better analyze. Data Golf does it best right now, but OWGR is completely useless. We need to get to a point where we do have a better method of identifying who these golfers are, especially with how much change there is week in and week out. We've talked at length before about how streaky the top 10 golfers in the world have been over the last, say, 6 to 8 years since the Tiger era kind of started to slow down and we moved away from that, his dominance. So that to me is significant. That can't be understated.
Yeah, Hokien's at 9 now in Data Golf. I must have read that wrong. And Gooch is back at 40 currently over
there.
So
yeah, that's a thing. So we had the player meeting just a couple days ago. It seems like the PIF and PGA Tour or PGA Tour Enterprises are getting closer to a deal. How do we feel about being a little closer to a deal? Maybe between the two parties. What are you feeling right now?
Oh, that's optimism on my side. I think, with a deal like this that's so politically involved and so many lawsuits going on and stuff like that, it's going to take a while, obviously. It's going to be interesting to see when this finally gets buttoned up. We may not see that for a few years, of course. But it's good to see that they're on the same sort of page. It doesn't seem like, and Jay Monahan's come out and said this a few times now, that the PIF has any problem with America, with the PGA Tour, getting money from Strategic Sports Group and going with a little bit of American funding. Seems like they have no problem with that. And the interesting, too, is just how Jay Monahan has remained steadfast that a PIF deal needs to happen. And that's 100% true, that we know that needs to happen. So it's going to be really interesting to see, though, what was really big out of that sort of presser to me is that we've had all this talk about whether players think that Jay Monahan is the person that should be, the head of the tour, the head of, the entity that's been created. And players are a little bit skeptical, of course. He went behind his back and made a backdoor deal, a year ago regarding the Saudis and the PGA Tour. And Jay was really, really positive in terms of saying that I'm the guy, I'm going to be the one to lead us there. And I think that was the most interesting part of the press conference for me is him being able to say that with a straight face and the camera that he is the right man for this job.
He doubled down on it too. So I was really interested in the message to players after that meeting on Monday with Yasir. Obviously, Monahan expressed optimism. Allegedly, he kind of told others that it felt like a sales pitch by Ramayan to the PGA Tour. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about that. He said that this is part of the tour doing its due diligence. He couldn't reveal any major details, but then he says to players that he's going to keep everyone updated, quote, as much as possible, but please understand that we need to maintain our position of not conducting negotiations in public, end quote. It's kind of what got you here, buddy. Maybe you shouldn't be taking that approach. I think the reason why he's doing that is because of the political issues that will come along with this. Any deal is going to be put under incredible scrutiny at the federal political level here in the United States. Congress is going to have things to say. The federal regulators are going to have things to say. And I agree with your timeline. I think it will literally take a few years to really get this ironed out. But maybe all they need is just a handshake agreement to allow there to be some kind of like flow between the two sides. Because I think one thing that would really remedy a lot of the other stuff, obviously Strategic Sports is going to be handling the funding for the next 5 or so years for the elevated purses and stuff, right? So that's taken care of. I think the bigger issue that both sides want to get straightened out is a scenario where live guys can come play on the PGA Tour. And I don't necessarily think that there needs to be, quote unquote, a finalized, federally approved investment, strategy or agreement in place for that to happen. And I think if they can get far enough along in these like negotiations, I think the two sides can kind of take a good faith approach to it and be like, okay, we're going the PGA Tour, we're going to step aside and let live guys play in X, Y, and Z events because they have done whatever the case may be. That'll probably make some people mad, but I think in terms of the casual golf fan, that's probably the number one thing that, they want to see get straightened out, because at the end of the day, we want to see, Jon Rahm, Brooks Koepka in these top tier events going toe to toe with Scottie Scheffler, because that would be just great for golf, period.
Yeah. I mean, look what the big Sunday we had at TPC Sawgrass that we've mentioned. I think if you just add Jon Rahm into there, you add Brooks Koepka into there, you add a guy like Joaquin Niemann, maybe Taylor Gooch even, and it can only make it better, right, Josh? So we talk so much about this unification of pro golf, and it seems like Monahan, it seems like maybe even Yasser is kind of on that, that page, right? And if everyone's on the same page, maybe we can get a deal done and we can get golf back to the best players playing against each other, which is where we need to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, that is going to do it for this edition of Out of Bounds. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, check out our Substack newsletter to stay connected to the show all the time. And follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram for more. Remember, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on Out of Bounds.